The Middle Ages lasted 1,000 years, so let's get started. Books, movies, and television programs set in the Middle Ages, or at least with a setting that somewhat resembles the Middle Ages, are very popular right now, and they have been for many, many generations. Medieval themes are found in Shakespeare's plays, Wagnerian operas, Broadway musicals, and in lots and lots of comic books, video games, and animated films. And some of these stories, such as Beowulf, were actually written during the Middle Ages. But whatever the individual storyline, the basic plots tend to be similar and feature a cast of familiar stock characters, locations, and events. Fierce and bloody battles led by knights in shining armor, and damsels in distress who need to be rescued by knights in shining armor. The damsels in distress theme was especially popular during the 19th and 20th centuries. Now it's often the female characters who do the rescuing, which is very much in line with the fact that there were many strong, powerful women during the Middle Ages, both in real life and in fiction. Although they typically wore regular clothes. Well, Joan of Arc did wear armor, something that was used against her at her heresy trial. That aside, for whoever is doing the rescuing, male or female, it always involves lots of swordplay. Play being a very inaccurate word here, because medieval weapons were extremely lethal, as these skulls of soldiers killed in battle show. But they all lived in fabulous castles, didn't they? Well, no. Medieval castles were actually grim fortresses, built for protection and defense, not for luxury. And they also served as prisons, where people such as Richard the Lionhearted could be held for ransom. Or just held, as was the case with the two princes imprisoned in the Tower of London by their uncle, King Richard III, and never seen again, a fate shared by many locked up in the Bastille, perhaps the grimmest of all the grim medieval fortresses. And all medieval sagas include a huge cast of villains. Some are from the nobility, others are described as monsters, dragons, or giants. Although some giants, such as Finn McCool, are not evil. Finn's strength and large stature made him not a villain, but a medieval superhero. Dragons, however, are always evil and bring chaos and violence everywhere they go. And then let's not forget all the magic that seems to be happening everywhere during the Middle Ages. Can any of this be true? Well, actually, all of it is true, to one degree or another. What we in Western culture commonly call the Middle Ages refers to Western Europe, mainly to the northern regions such as France, Germany, the British Isles, and Scandinavia. The Middle Ages began in 476, when the government of the Western Roman Empire collapsed, and ended in the 15th century. In 1400 in Italy at the beginning of the Italian Renaissance, and in 1485 in England, following the death of King Richard III at the Battle of Bosworth. This 1,000-year period is complicated and diverse, so let's look at it in terms of movies. The early Middle Ages, that's the era of King Arthur, Beowulf, the Viking raids, and Charlemagne. The Middle Ages, which we in art history call the Romanesque period, includes the Norman conquest of England and the Crusades. That's the era of Robin Hood and the Knights Templars. The late Middle Ages, or the Gothic period, is when things got more elegant and the Gothic cathedrals were built. But it's also when the Black Death struck Europe. So, there really was no one medieval way of life. Still, medieval facts can be separated from medieval fiction. So let's focus on what are the most likely to be fiction: dragons, monsters, and magic. Dragons played a major role in Norse mythology and were seen as agents of chaos, power, and terror. This is one reason why Viking longships had prows shaped like a dragon's head. Dragon-headed ships were used by William the Conqueror when he invaded England in 1066, as depicted here in the Bayeux Tapestry. William was from Normandy in northern France, but he used Viking-style boats because the Normans themselves were originally from Scandinavia. The name Norman means Norsemen, men of the north. Here's a real Viking ship from a mound burial in Norway. The bow and stern are elaborately decorated with complex wood carvings in the shape of a huge dragon. The dragon's curling tail is on the stern. Its snake-like head is represented on the prow. Additional dragon-headed posts are found throughout the ship. When first discovered, it was thought to be the grave of a king or warrior, the Beowulf scenario. But the Oseberg ship actually contains the bodies of 2 high-ranking women, demonstrating once again that women played a more important role in medieval society than was once believed. As for the dragons themselves, they could be completely imaginary, but their snake-like appearance suggests that they were inspired by fossils as well as by the actual appearance and behavior of living reptiles. But whatever their inspiration, when a dragon-headed Viking warship docked on the beach near your village, you had no doubt that dragons are real. Because people in Victorian times were short, due to negative environmental and social changes brought about by the Industrial Revolution, there is a common misperception that people in the Middle Ages were also really short. Untrue. Extensive research has shown that the average height of a person living during the Middle Ages was between 5'5" and 5'8½, the same average height as people living today. This is probably because medieval people had better diets and exercised more than their Victorian counterparts. And like today, some medieval people were far taller. Charlemagne, for example, was around 6'3" tall, as was Richard the Lionhearted. So, it stands to reason that other medieval men and women were even taller, giving rise to legends of giants. Nothing supernatural about it, just exaggerated stories. The same is true of monsters. Many so-called monsters were simply ordinary animals such as whales and crocodiles that were unfamiliar to medieval Europeans. But the other source of monster legends is way sadder. It involves creatures with birth abnormalities, such as 2 heads or an additional limb, and that included human beings. It also included individuals who became disfigured due to injury or disease. Although some of these people were well taken care of, many more were shunned, bullied, and forced to live away from the community, as was the case with the monster Grendel in Beowulf. This attitude was not something found only in the Middle Ages. Well into the 1960s, circuses and carnivals had sideshows featuring people with disabilities, shows popularly known as freak shows. What a sad state of affairs. But there's another source of medieval monster legends which is still sad, but does not include harming any living person or animal. In The Lord of the Rings, there is an area called the Dead Marshes, where bodies of dead warriors rise up from the waters of the bog. This seems like fiction, but it's based on fact. During ancient times in Northern Europe, peat bogs were used as places of human sacrifice. And if conditions were exactly right, the bodies submerged in the tannic-rich bog water could be perfectly preserved. These naturally occurring mummies have been uncovered for thousands of years and are known as bog bodies. They gave rise to a very well-known monster, a malevolent undead creature known as the Boogeyman. Now, what about magic? I seriously doubt that there were fairies, leprechauns, trolls, or any other supernatural beings living during the Middle Ages, and the same goes for wizards. However, there were certainly men and women who appeared to have magical powers. For example, alchemists were scientists who experimented with chemicals, producing pyrotechnics and chemical reactions that may have seemed like magic. But no alchemist could turn base metals into gold, no matter what was sometimes believed. And then there were the entertainers, people who, just like today, were known as magicians, conjurers, and illusionists. Their magic was all presto changeo, smoke and mirrors, rabbit out of a hat type illusionism. But there were also a few very intelligent people who got a reputation for being magicians or wizards simply because they figured out how things work. Merlin may have been one such person. According to legend, it was Merlin who moved the blue stones of Stonehenge from Wales to Salisbury Plain in England. Well, the blue stones are from Wales, and someone had to figure out how to move them, so why not some very intelligent person named Merlin, whose reputation grew and grew over the next 3,000 years, until by the Middle Ages he became remembered as magical. But when a living person began calling up the dead and casting magic spells, they risked being accused of sorcery, which was heresy, an offense against God and the church, and punishable by burning. So no medieval magician, would risk advertising themselves like this unless they wanted to end up like this. Although, to be fair, widespread burning of heretics, sorcerers, and witches did not happen very often in the Middle Ages. That occurred during the Renaissance. So what can be concluded about the Middle Ages? Were they magical and glamorous, or just plain miserable? Well, probably a combination of both. But what time period isn't? For the 10-Minute Professor, this is Dr. Susan Rae Euler. Thanks for tuning in.